All right, so basically what this proposal is essentially adding the generic collection interfaces to the regex types. So they were built in V1, so they were all using the non-generic collections. And that, obviously enabled other scenarios like link where you can actually, use groups.cast today already. But the problem is you don't want to do this cast in the middle, right? Because you already know it's a group. But the problem is because it's IEnumerable, you basically only get object out of it, right? And so link doesn't really work as you would expect it to. And so by adding the generic interfaces, you basically get, types just match up and everything just works as you would expect it to. Now, once you do that, obviously there's a whole bunch of API churn. And then the other question is, what kind of non-generic collections do we implement? The generic ones do we implement iList or just iRead-only list or whatever, right?
So are some of these generic arguments structs, or they're all reference types as well?
You're asking this performance benefit.
Yeah, whether the implementation is changing as well to use generic
enumerators, or
if the types being returned from the enumerator current are structs.
Basically, Christoph is asking. I think Christoph's asking whether or not we're going to have a perf degrade because we're allocating on a strongly typed enumeration.
Or the existing implementation has a bunch of APIs that are based on untyped.
Well, let's take a look. I don't think that's actually
lots of value types.
Enumerator.
They're going to be box done.
No,
Yeah.
they're all classes using non-struct enumerators.
Yes.
Right there.
As you can see here, they just return IEnumerator, right? So
no, he's talking about the element types.
Yeah, the element types.
So the element types, capture and group, are not.
no, they're all.
They are reference types.
They're reference types. So there's no boxing going on.
Yeah, it's literally more for the usability, right? So that you don't have to cast a string every once in a while.
So one of the questions that came up was capture collection is read only, right? So does it make sense to implement the iCollection and iList, the mutable interfaces on the collection itself? And our current stance on that is yes, we still implement the mutable interfaces on read-only collections.
So funny enough, I didn't implement iList before.
You should make sure that plays well with serializers.
Yeah. So I marked this as serialization impact, but I don't know whether this is serializable on desktop. So
it does every type as data contract serializer can be used with any type.
No, it will only serializable and data contract serialize. XML serializable will serialize any type.
If anything that has public properties, they can serialize.
Oh yeah, public. Yeah.
And they are marked serializable on desktop.
They are marked. Yeah. So this will have serialization impact. So
the collection is marked as serialization.
So this will probably change the serialization. So we'll have to investigate what that means for desktop.
Do we have a consensus about mutation?
So I actually think it's worth talking about a bit more because we get a lot of pushback when we. I think for things like very general purpose collections, it's kind of like the pragmatic approach of saying, you can pass it around everywhere and kind of like you compose with the ecosystem well, like you don't have this thing that's like very general purpose. But then like in certain domain specific places, like I can use the example of the metadata reader where like there's a collection type for every kind of handle. There's like 50 kinds of handle, and the entire API is immutable. And it's like just we can decorate it all with a bunch more interfaces and methods that throw. But how often are you going to be sort of composing? It's not a general purpose collection. It's literally a collection. And regex sort of feels like in the boundaries there, where maybe whereas I stand firmly behind the idea that it's fine that it's not a bad design for something general purpose. It seems reasonable at some point to say, something that's very specialized, that is known to be read-only, maybe we don't always have to make it, sort of something you can pass everywhere iList is taken, the specific use case here is like, link queries. So as long as we have the IEnumerable, maybe it's okay to start doing some read-only. It's like, I know that we sort of, I'm wondering if there really is like all collections should implement all interfaces, or if it's actually, it really is more of a depends on the domain and so forth kind of a question.
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem is that originally the framework had basically no read-only collections, right? It was all one interface, and then the interface had a mode is read-only true or false, right? And then later on in 4.5 we added read-only interface, and then after 4.5 we added immutability, right? Now we have 3 fairly distinct shapes of interfaces, and the question is, when you implement one of them, what does it mean for the others, right? And I think that's
one of the comments in the PR was by implementing like iList of capture, now we opt into FastPaths and link for like count. And
But it's actually bugs, though. We should fix the
they
FastPath.
are bugs.
Link should be using iRead-only collection, iRead-only list. It should be doing a type query for that.
Yeah, the interesting thing now is now that you got 2 lookups for the slow
You
part
do.
now.
You will, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Another thing to note here is that while on desktop they only implement iCollection, they do actually have a public is read-only property that returns true. On collection capture collection, it's not exposed and done in corporate on desktop. We have an is read-only property that set returns true right now on these collections, or at least on the capture collection.
I wonder if historically they ever did implement that and we deleted it.
Maybe.
Yeah, that seems weird.
I'm always in favor of anything you can do statically, do it. Like, and having something which can never implement an interface, implement the interface is always a little silly to me. I understand we've done it historically for various reasons, but I have to make a choice whether I take an iCollection or an iRead-only collection. Correct.
And that because iCollection doesn't derive from iRead-only collection.
Why? I know.
I have
yes.
to fork now based on that.
Correct, but at the same time, there's no reason that as a general solution, like wrapping an iRead-only list in iList and iList in iRead-only list is one allocation, and it's a standard generic wrapper that you can put over any implementation. And I think if we continuing down a path where we say that we have this dynamic mutability in collections when we're in a static, strongly typed language, like I'd say, like let's push us towards a more strongly typed world and start investing in adapters for the cases where we're investing between. I mean, there's no reason that we couldn't have 2 extension methods to like wrap in list or wrap in read-only list. One allocation,
But
I'd move us.
basically,
I'd like us to move towards.
you're basically saying that we should deprecate iList.
No,
Because iList is not what you... Basically, you said this type cannot implement iList.
correct. I'm not.
It can because iList is not read-write interface. iList has modes. It has this property that says, am I read-only or not read-only? So that's how it was envisioned. So you're either redefining what iList is or saying we shouldn't be using it.
No, I'm
And we should
saying
have a new set of
we should
abstractions.
avoid the modal uses of it. We should. Well, there's just because we've made mistakes in the past doesn't mean we have to keep making them going forward.
well, I would claim that like the level to which is a mistake is maybe not as as bad as it may seem. I mean, in practice, I think it is a mistake in the sense that like in practice, most of the time you're reading, very rarely like you're writing through like someone passed you an abstraction, you write into a list or something. It's less common than to sort of like give me a list, I need to index into it and kind of But I mean, I don't know. I mean, we was like this for a long time. I don't feel like there's like a huge amount of bugs that are like because of this, but.
But we also, in the past, we haven't had immutable collections. Like it wasn't a problem because everything was mutable. I'm sure it's just going to sound great on recording. But now we've had pretty much exclusively writable collections up to now. Where the majority.
Read-only. And the read-onliness was achieved by implementing this thing and returning false from can write or whatever.
Well, the one concern that
we're basically trying to push to a world where it's like we added this collection iRead-only list, and we have no intention of ever taking advantage of it.
No, I think you use it when you're accepting. You use it when you're designing API that accepts a collection. But when you're designing a collection type, in order to have it be used by the largest number of API, including legacy API that might be using then you implement the most interfaces that make sense. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for these things to implement the old one.
But it's also, yes, you're saying I want my collection to be used in the maximum number of places, but you're trading static typing for dynamic typing there. Because you're saying that this will, for instance, like a clear method, like this would capture collection would perfectly fine go to a iList of T which did a fast clear or some notion of that, and it would fail dynamically, as opposed to I say, look, I can't ever write. I'm only an I read-only list, and if your API hasn't moved to the future, move to the future.
I think the argument is that those methods shouldn't fail dynamically, right? They should be checking the is read-only property and then not doing it.
What would they do? Imagine what would they do? They throw. That's failing dynamically.
Most of the time,
it is a dynamic fail.
To be honest with you, I don't generally check because the best I can do is throw, and the collection's going to throw anyways. And
right.
And say that it can't be used. Like
I completely agree. Checking is read only is worthless. Like just go to the operation.
Yes, because it will throw, right? I mean,
yeah. If you say if is read only, okay, I'm going to throw versus you checking.
There's very few operations. Well, there's very few operations that are sort of sound. Like, if read only, take this path. If not, take this other path. Generally, like, if you have the intent to write to this thing, you're not. You're
just going to write.
There's really no code path you can take that's not like an exceptional.
But the argument is if you take a collection, you stuff it away, and then you fail in later cases, it may be better to fail earlier, right? But
sure.
That's a different argument.
There are subtle cases where you should check is read only, but generally speaking, I'm agreeing that it's basically for failing.
Yes.
Like for saying, whoops, I need this to be read-only.
Serialization uses it, for example. They determine whether it's read-only, or they can potentially set the entire property as opposed to mutating the collection.
Yeah, and it's the API that takes the collection that needs to check it, right? It doesn't help us if we don't say that we're not an iList.
I would also say in many cases it's somewhat obvious. It's the same argument with stream, right? If I call a method called save and I pass in a read-only stream, I mean, yes, it would be nice to get a static violation for that, but it is somewhat obvious, right? It's not like I don't think the world collapses. I mean, the question, I think this is the problem, right? I mean, we only have one stream type today, right? So if we would add a read-only stream type, we would have the same argument, right? And I think the problem is we now have two static types. One of them is basically stronger than the other. Now the question is, what are we doing with these two types? What's our stance on that? I think we probably should table that particular discussion and say, like, I mean, we probably should have a general, like, approach for dealing with those, either having adapters or just saying guideline-wise, if you implement a collection and you implement iList, you should also implement iRead-only list, or the other way around, right?
Well, certainly that way.
Yeah, if you implement iList, you should definitely implement iRead-only.
So if we think about this another way, if we implemented this today, we wouldn't create a capture collection. You would use a collection of capture or whatever, some object. We would use our generic collections, which have all these particular interfaces.
We just derive from read-only collection.
But I would propose that, like, I think it's a very interesting discussion. I didn't want to say that what Jared was saying we shouldn't do. I was just trying to say you're trying to redefine what iList was designed originally for. Yeah. And you basically were proposing now we only implement it on read-write collections. And that was not how it was designed for.
Yes.
But I think it's a kind of guideline discussion. We can spend hours on it. So I think we should, for the purpose of this review, say we are following today's guidelines. And if we want to change the guidelines, and it takes longer than 2 minutes, we just table it and we have a separate.
Okay. Yeah, and we have this with the immutable collections too. So the immutable collections also do this.
Yes.
Yeah. And read-only collections today in the framework implements all these. So. Setting the guideline basically.
Right. I know, but that just be clear. That's just we're not saying that that's the right decision. We're just falling to what we've already done, and I do think we should step back and say that might not be the right decision.
Absolutely, I agree. The problem is that, like, if you go and look at binding, it all works over iList, right? So if we don't implement iList on this thing,
data binding. In fact, I wanted to say
data binding should be doing an observable collection anyway. Like
not in WinForms. Like WinForms doesn't respect that.
We have a lot of legacy stuff.
Go to WinForms, is it? Can we? I guess.
But what do you mean?
Why not?
So whatever we add here is going to go into desktop.
We just said we weren't sure about. I don't. Okay.
No, it will. It will. If we touch any desktop types, they will get them eventually.
So to be fair, like to state the high level goal, the goal is if you compile against these modern libraries, you can also run on desktop. You may not run on all versions of desktop because only a specific version added the APIs. But the idea is eventually you will be able to run on both sides.
Gotcha.
All right. So are we generally okay with
let's
that
stick
particular type here? So basically, what was added is it already implemented iCollection and iEnumerable, obviously. So then it added iCollection of capture, and it also added iList. Apparently, the original one didn't even implement iList, which is somewhat weird given that it has an indexer. But that's
so this one I wonder, like, what benefit do we get from implementing iList?
Well,
Same-
you
same benefit.
interrupt.
Because it is an iList, technically. It would never implement the interface, but it had counted an indexer, and contains and...
Why not? It seems like fair.
What APIs?
Well, so data binding looks for iList.
It looks for iList. It doesn't look for iList. The generic one, yeah.
It doesn't look for the generic one. Because working with generic interfaces is not
All right.
easy in a dynamic.
I mean, the main thing I kind of regret in this API is that the enumerator is not typed.
do you have a time machine?
Is that what would be required?
Yeah, I think this is a V1 thing, right? If you want to run on both sides, then that's the way to...
Well, we could have added a struct enumerator back then, but yes.
Yeah, we
We
did.
could add a struct enumerator.
Yeah,
No, now we could if we for the. No, actually wouldn't.
No,
No, we can't. Damn it.
no, we can't.
We can just add a new enumerator pattern to C# language.
Get the numerator fast.
Interfaces too would be good.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Compiler guys are doing it. I'm fine with that.
So I think the general thing looks okay. I've got a few questions, which is, for example, why does the strongly typed copy to explicitly implemented?
I think what Justin's goal was, he basically exposed everything. It basically kept the service area the same. He just implemented everything explicitly. I think that was the.
So I would go and revisit some of those. So,
I think index of, for example, or
index of, copy to.
Basically, what do you usually say? The non-mutating API should be just the non-mutating API should be non-explicit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, there we go. Non-explicitly.
If they work, then
The non-mutating strongly typed interface. Yeah.
That's right.
Because not iList of dot contains that takes object should not be.
Yeah. It's a lot of boilerplate. This is where, like,
Well, the public
I-
but there.
I wonder if it's easier just to derive from read-only collection here.
Can't.
Oh, we could.
Yeah.
No, we can't because it causes overload resolution bugs.
In what way?
Because if you change this to the capture collection, if you're calling something which has an overload of I collection and read-only collection, it would have swapped the overload choice. I don't know how strongly you guys want to maintain.
We actually intentionally do that in some cases.
Okay, that would be.
Well, so if the behavior is the same, then
if the behavior is the same and you just get better perf, then we allow that.
I don't-
We've done it intentionally.
It would change customer scenario. I don't know how we can say anything about what their code does.
I see what you're saying. So if some customer,
Only-
yeah,
and
we
only when
tend
they
to
recompile.
do this with our own overloads.
I don't know what the policy
yeah,
is.
but you could do that just by introducing an interface, right?
Yes, you could there too.
So we consider that
We're already doing
perfectly
that.
valid.
That's what we're doing.
Right.
We're adding interfaces.
Yeah.
So we could already have this problem
We could
from
yeah.
this change as proposed.
So we could consider just implementing read-only. I don't know what capture collection does underneath, but maybe that might be.
What does it depend on? Do we know?
Capture collection.
That would mean though, wouldn't that
contract-wise, what
force
does this
if you
guy-
implemented read-only collection, wouldn't that mean that the indexer becomes new? All of these methods.
It would have to become new.
Well,
The
get a
ones that
new.
don't have the same signature, right?
The ones that don't have the same signature.
They all look at every one of those methods though. They're all like if you go back to the API review, count this, get a numerator, all three of those methods on read-only collection. You'd have to make all of them.
No, they would be.
But
No,
what benefit
they-
do we get?
The base
It's just easier to implement.
Right, but you guys. I guess I don't know what's okay to break. Like it breaks reflection. I know that screwed you guys on desktop before.
For sure. Breaks.
I would not even do that. Honestly, it's like, do we want to take...
I know that guys have busted you guys in the past, so it's.
Read-only collections is in system.
I don't know what. Since this goes back.
It would certainly run.
Read-only collection is in system runtime.
Yes.
Is very low. Yes.
Why?
Because system runtime.
We just don't.
Yeah.
Put it on
It's it is an object model exchange type.
I know in the past reflection has broken you guys on desktop. This would break.
Does it live? System object model?
Unless you made those.
It's in system runtime.
Okay, so then
The dependency isn't bad. It's just a matter of the compat risk.
They'd certainly
I
get
actually
a
don't think
numerator.
it's
Would
this
have to
right
be.
now.
You get a numerator, have to be new.
Because there's a lot of APIs that already
Yeah,
exist.
the enumerator would have to be new.
I see.
But everything else would be satisfied by the base.
I don't think it's worth introducing the base class personally.
I haven't looked at the PR, but I bet there's a whole bunch of boilerplate code because of that, though. I mean,
I would tend to agree.
I mean, it just means a lot of these
My point
boilerplate
about
would
the
just be
boilerplate is like
disappear.
is that
Yeah.
I'm capture collection is interesting to me because it's like very domain specific, and it's kind of my point. Like when I get to the metadata reader, for example, like a bunch of strongly typed collections, and because of the way that they're designed, they're like views over things, and they can't just be like derived from read-only collection. It doesn't make sense. They can't copy the data, and now you have to implement this boilerplate like 50 times, and it starts to. Whereas like if you do it on like immutable list or on list, it's like whatever boilerplate you do is like you get the benefit of that one general purpose thing, composing with everything in the entire ecosystem. But like when you start to get to like capture collection, I start to question like, is it worth all this boilerplate? But
so what?
I mean, I would say my point is like based on the other things, like the guideline could also be relaxed to say like this type may not be the end of the world if it doesn't compose as well as list or immutable list. So it's only for regexes. The basic cases are covered. We don't necessarily need to decorate it with all these boilerplate.
Well, most of the time, to David's point, right? If you would start from scratch, you would just derive from collection or read-only collection of T, right? In that case, you get all that for free, right? I think in your particular example with the metadata reader, you're going out of your way not to use the base types because of perf. So you want to implement basically when you have a struct, and now it becomes a text. But at that point, I would agree that implementing 15 interfaces is also kind of a non-goal for that particular API because the whole point of is perf, right?
But I think Nick's point was that this is very similar.
And I would say
if you were writing this one for the first time, you would just derive from read-only collection and you wouldn't care.
Yes.
Because you weren't worried about implementing a specific collection for perf reasons.
I'm surprised it doesn't derive from read-only collection base. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know.
It actually holds an array directly too, and it does all the manipulation itself.
So it's just wrapping an array.
Oh, you're looking at the diff between .NET Core before and .NET Core after, right? We're not looking at the diff between desktop. So maybe in desktop it did, and maybe we removed
Maybe we dropped collection.
And that's probably why iList also disappeared.
Which means we can't implement read-only collection.
Can't implement read-only collection.
Because then the base would be different between desktop and...
I'm looking at the desktop code when I'm talking to you about this, by the way.
So it doesn't derive from collection.
No.
Read-only.
So it wraps directly around the array.
Yeah.
I see.
I would keep it simple.
Just add the interfaces.
Yeah.
It's easier to...
That seems reasonable. And we're fine with all the interfaces, or do we think we should...
Depends what you mean by simple. Simple would be just...
Simple, less dependencies.
Unless we have a strong reason to remove one of them, I think all of them should be there, just because that's...
Yeah, I would agree. All right, so then that type looks good. Group collection, I think, probably the same arguments. I think...
I love the parameter names. Group num.
Yeah.
Yeah, meaning what? That's what we want?
Yeah,
No, we can't change parameter names.
It's a breaking
Oh,
change.
those are existing APIs? Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It would just be index.
It would be index.
It wouldn't really give you like... It's not like,
Yeah,
it's a lost opportunity to
Have you
convey
seen
like...
anybody calling the indexer?
Can you? In what language can you specify the
No, I
index or
haven't.
parameter? Can you?
You can. It both,
Oh, yeah,
both,
no,
both,
come on. I guess.
both dynamic and just source breaking. Group num, colon.
But I've never seen someone
Yeah,
pass the
let's
indexer.
Open bracket, group name.
It's in the compiler all the time.
That same comment as above, that covers the
Yeah, we were, so,
non-mutating public
yeah, same comment as above, yeah.
of comment stuff.
So I think nothing else shows up.
When we test this and we notice that break serialization because we added iList, I think that's actually a real possibility. Are we okay with removing iList from its list of interfaces?
Well, is it iList? What is it looking for?
Well, iList has the indexer and it has more setting. It's basically it's serializing based on IEnumerable or iCollection right now, and then if we have the iList added to it, it might change the serialization code path it's using.
I think it's the format that changes, right? That's the problem, right?
Well, sometimes it might try to actually start setting like the accessors or something like that.
I think the break we saw with string dictionary was once it saw that you implemented the generic interface, it went through the generic interface.
Dictionary, you have a problem because if it's key value pair or what's the old one? dictionary entry. So it actually gets confused between the types. It queries for one interface and then doesn't call through the interface.
Yep.
It just calls. That's actually, in my opinion, a bug, but in the serializer. But it starts to call through, and now it's not sure if it should be getting a dictionary entry or key value pair. Whereas here, I think if it's just dealing with the enumerable, it's always going to be getting the same.
I was just posing the question that we're going to test the serialization scenario, but if we end up breaking it, are we okay with the? Is that a good enough reason to remove one of these?
Well, yeah, of course.
Yes, I don't think we can't break that.
We can't break that. Sorry.
Well, it depends on how this ships on desktop. Is it already a facade, or would we ship it to?
No, it's a facade. It's desktop. Desktop will implement. Yes.
Yes.
This has to unify with desktop. So
Yes.
Totally.
So we would pull any interfaces that broke desktop serialization.
Okay. All right.
Or fix or try and see what the break is, right? And figure out what it is.
Let me actually add this comment.
Just the serializer.
It's unfortunate these are serializable.
Well, from the same token, like since it could break serialization, like it could break an app trying to do the same thing. So if the app compat break was big enough, it could mean the same thing when we tried to bring this to desktop.
It's unlikely, but
if they're looking for the wrong interfaces, but you could say the same thing, right? They could be they could be looking for iCollection of foo first, and then go down a completely different path, and then fall back to the non-generic case.
We all know that adding any API is a breaking change in some scenarios. So we just have to figure out.
All right.
We have to quirk reflection.
I didn't hear that.
Quirk to the end.
So I think
Game over, man. If we have to quirk reflection.
Quirk the type system.
Have the type
For
system
all these
right.
collections read only, like match group and
I
tablet.
think they're all read only, yes, because they're all just returned.
Yeah.
So I would hope they're read only. Otherwise, it's really confusing.
Yeah, and they're all non-constructable too, because they all have internal constructors.
Yes. So that's pretty.
Which is unfortunate.
Which it means I don't know the serialization. So yeah, they have to call the internal constructors, which is fun.
Well, if they do they implement iSerializer?
No, they're just tagged to serialization.
Do they have protected constructors?
They don't have protected serialization constructors.
Then how can they be
They
serialized?
have internal constructors though. Actually, they don't even have internal default constructors, so I don't even think they can be serialized. They just tag the serializer. So they may not even be serialized.
The binary serializer is just an array, right? They don't need any.
Yeah, but they don't even have a constructor, a default constructor.
You can serialize, you cannot deserialize.
Yeah.
It's just gonna put the array back in its place.
Well, so
Not all of them are backed by arrays. This, like the group collection, is backed by
Binary formatters.
The
Well,
binary,
actually, with serializable, it's the same thing. They would just put that thing making.
binary serializer will work.
yeah. All right.
So this is the thing.
Let's just we'll
Try it.
Try it and figure out what.
All right. So match collection, same thing. I don't think there's anything. Let me just add that comment that says same as above. God, your touchpad is the wrong direction, dude. This is super confusing. Yep, there's no more differences. These are the only. Yep, I looked at everything.
Okay.
I
So I would assume that he just throws the same exceptions that.
What do we think? Yeah, so.
What was it? Wait, just do what read-only collection does.
Yeah.
We have tests for people who implement abstractions like collections that they can basically plug their implementation into the tests and say, hey, I'm throwing the right exceptions, I'm implementing the contract.
I think we have them on scattered blog posts, but we don't have a framework we don't have like a NuGet package. How about that?
Yeah,
We should.
Just that for stream.
Yeah, stream. We have a bunch of these
We
abstractions.
should have that for equitable as well.
Yeah.
Like getting all of the ins and outs of equals is not necessarily. There's a lot of unintuitive tests you need to write.
Feature request. Wes, you
Put it on the back.
you adding comments?
Yeah,
You
we've
record
got
that?
some out. An open source people can steal, but it's pretty.
I mean, in email.
So I started trying to write the file stream test like that, and one of the challenges is that you probably want to control construction in each test, so you need to come up with some
The way I
pattern for it.
The way I do is basically the API is like validate equality, and you pass in like one value, then you pass in a set of equal values and a set of unequal values.
Sure.
And then the test operates. That way users control construction, and they're giving you what they think should be equal and not
But you
equal.
kind of want more granular test cases, right? You kind of want those to be broken down into like a bunch of unique test items. And
So yeah, let's talk about the testing also another time. All right, so this one is basically a PR for adding async overloads on X document. So X document load async doesn't exist today, and so this PR basically just adds those.
Why would we write load async but not write async? Because there's writing methods on X document as well. It seems like if we're going to do read async, we should do write async.
Or save async, but
Well, yeah,
same thing.
yeah,
Same
same
thing.
thing. Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
that's a good
Yeah,
point.
that's a good point.
Yeah, right there.
Okay, so the first thing that spots out is that we don't always have a cancellation token, right? So we usually provide an overload that doesn't take a token.
Why do you guys eschew having default parameters? Because if you think about it, like if you guys without, so this is like logically just take existing APIs and have an async version. And without default parameters, we're going to, for save, we're going to be adding 8 new overloads.
Why does it matter if we have 8 new overloads as opposed to
4? Just maintain.
Default parameters just do not version well.
So
Always.
Roslyn came up with a way to version. They have a plan to version optional parameters. Basically, you add a new overload. Once you want to add an extra parameter, you add a new overload. You make that optional. You unoptional the one that was optional.
Is this going to be something that
So that works.
person will be able to
You
figure
need
out?
to make sure that, like, so I like this plan because it works. You need to make sure that we actually implement something that is capable of checking this properly and that this is that maneuver.
We haven't.
I'm not going to remember in code review to be like, oh,
It's
you got to
easy to just basically
you got to
screw yourself up
do
if
this
you.
maneuver. I'm not.
Well, if you could probably write tools like API Compat that would catch that, right? Because if you have basically 2 overloads and that basically share a prefix and they both have optional suffixes, that's probably going to be a problem. So you should be able to write a rule that says that's probably not intentional.
Yeah, we could probably change
Just
API compat to.
The maneuver is correct. It's just not intuitive. So like, if I would not like, it's not easy to remember to be like, oh, wait, here's how you need to make this code change.
Oh yeah, no,
Right,
that's what I'm
it's
saying.
just
You need to have tooling that enforces that.
If we want to go start using that pattern, somebody should write it up. And
Yeah, we should have a write up before we go in ahead and make sure.
Can you take a note on that one, because I think that's something we should discuss as well, like in 2 hours.
We should walk through the compat, like version to version. What does it look like?
Yeah.
Make sure we've got some rules to back it up.
But I agree that if we could make it safely and have tools, code analysis rules, it would be nice, because in a lot of cases it's just busy work adding a bunch of overloads.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at save, we would only have to add 3 new overloads, because these 2 first ones, you essentially collapse these into stream options equals save options, whatever the default is, cancellation token equals default cancellation token. Like, we would substantially reduce the amount of work needed here.
That's a good point.
The overloads really aren't that much work, but this is a pins.
It's just it's not that much work, but it's like you have to figure out how to like
not
write
so
the
much
doc comments and the ref doc comments. Then it's just
Yeah, we agree that we just never had a pattern before for versioning them, so that's why we've been skeptical about using them.
And
So the versioning pattern's new.
it's not so much the effort of, it's not the work to implement them. It's actually the readability of it. It's that there's more noise. The signal to noise ratio of the code when you're reading it goes, is worsened, because now there are these overloads that you really are not interested in reading that are
If we get the proposal and we can get it defined, that's fine. It's just going against one of our ingrained rules, so we just have to convince ourselves that that's okay.
So one question, but given these overloads, do we need all of them? Like, I know that it was done for parity with the non-async APIs. Are they all?
I think you already collapsed them down, right? You already So load options, for example, he doesn't provide an overload, right? He just has one and then assumes you pass in the default if you want the default, right?
But I'm saying, like, isn't stream and text reader
I'm not
interchangeable? Like,
stream and what? Text reader.
text reader.
Well, they're
Like,
not exchangeable.
Not really.
You can get a stream from text reader, correct?
Well, we already have.
No, you can get a stream reader wraps a stream.
But it may be buffering or something.
I
Yeah.
don't remember.
The other thing is load
I don't think
async.
so.
I don't know how this. I'd like to look at the implementation of this because I don't know how load async with the URI is going to work because isn't the resolution of the URI.
So right now, that's one of the warts on this contract that's been there since we created it for store, is that there was too much usage to eliminate the path dependency. And so right now, every implementation of XML has some internal resolver for handling this.
But that's not async, right? Like DNS resolution is not async. So how would you look up this URI?
For those cases in the past, these libraries have just spawned a task to go do it, and that's sort of the async as part of the larger async operation.
I see.
So it prevents blocking the calling the thread, but it's not
Ideal.
You're still burning a thread for that small piece.
Yeah, I see.
I mean, the argument could also be like, well, if you ever change the implementation, then code just lights up, right?
But if we're trying to eliminate such dependencies, do we want that overload?
Yeah, that's. I think that's a bit.
Probably should exclude it.
I would.
Yeah, I would like to go back and deprecate load URI, but
Right, so it's probably not a good idea to add yet another way to go to URI when we don't even want this at all.
Well, unless we will never be able to deprecate it, then it doesn't make sense to like.
We're always going to have to support the load string URI probably. I don't think we're going to really
throw it at some point.
I don't think we'll ever be able to get away with it.
To play.
In which case, your point is saying we might as well have the async version of it too, right?
Well, it at least makes it easier to move to async, right?
I guess, yes.
I mean, it's the most attractive API here, right? I mean, that's where you throw in the path, right? I mean,
yeah, but the behavior just changes so differently depending where you're running, right? In some worlds, it loads from the package directory.
don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's an awesome API. I'm just saying that's the one that most people will.
No, as long as it's there, yeah.
We still can potentially try to deprecate it in this basically say, don't call this one, do your loading first and call the stream API or the reader API.
I'm not sure why you say
deprecate
I understand we cannot ever
with the attribute.
We have an obsolescence story for contracts.
Yes, we do.
If we think that we can obsolete the load ones that take strings,
Then we don't need
then
to
we should not add this.
I agree. We should probably mark it obsolete.
The problem is until really the problem is until we have a nice friendly way of adding extension statics. It's not a.
How? Oh, you mean? So you mean that we have no way to put this API in a higher contract, right?
In a higher contract that goes and pulls in file system, pulls in.
We'd have to have another type right now called X document file system, and you call through that or something.
It's still not the end of the world. You don't have to have an extension method. You can just have a helper.
Well, it's just that the first what you do is you say X document dot load. Oh, my API is not there.
Yeah.
The point is like we're not opposed to these APIs just sort of being way up top, gluing things together, and we don't like that in order to factor things, we lose the nice way that the code looked. Yeah, but we can lose it, but.
Well, except in this case, like the API would look very nice, except it has different behaviors. It kind of pretends to be the same,
sure,
but it's not. So I don't know.
This one maybe.
No, but you could say load from file or load from.
Oh yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah,
The
makes
nice thing
sense.
about having the string API though is the issue of ownership is very simple. Like I can say load async of some file path and I'm done. If I have a stream though, and I'm asynchronously loading the document, I now have to think about tying the lifetime of the stream, which is probably already synchronous, to this asynchronous operation which is happening. So we've basically taken the easiest API and said don't do it.
We don't have a using we can wrap around load async is what you're getting at. Right? Using block.
Well, if you wrap a using, you've created a bug.
You have to create a continuation.
Yeah, you have to create a continue. Like we're basically saying, I don't know. I guess you could argue this is only callable from other async methods, but it's.
Question related to that. I just want to double check. all the I/O done as part of the load and save operation, or is any of it deferred to individual instance operations on X document?
No, I think it's all. I think it's all load up front.
It's an eager load. So you could say, oh, like you basically just have to tie a continuation off of that to kill the stream.
Makes me wonder if there can't be an option to say
No,
or
optional ownership.
Using in an async method, right? So
You can. I'm just noting that it's the simplest, easiest one is the one we're getting rid of.
It's also like
It's also, to be fair though, it's the most common case that you actually do eager construction in the method, return your own object model, and then move on, right? I mean, like what you're basically saying is if you interleave the lifetimes, right? When you have an async method that returns the stream and another one that returns this one, now it's a bit more complicated because at some point you have to know when the loading is done and you can safely dispose the stream, right? But I think if, like most people just, you construct the stream, you pass the stream on, and then you assume that the reader is done by the time you hit this, and then you can safely dispose the stream. So if you have them basically in one method, it's not too bad. I think it's more problematic when you have like them all over the place and you pass these guys around. But that's generally a problem with streams when you pass them around.
Anyway, yeah. Okay, don't want to.
But I think your argument holds true. It's the easiest API, removing it, right? Or at least entertain the idea of removing it, which is unfortunate.
The same with talking about making token potentially optional. Do you want to do that with options to match the rest of the overlays?
Yeah, so that's a good one. So let's say we would introduce optionality, then we obviously wouldn't do that. But if we don't do it, then I guess we should add overloads, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What about the load options? Like, do we match these overloads? Because that seems excessive.
Yeah, I would say that.
Well, let's assume that we're going to have a plan for using optional parameters.
So then we're going to block on that until this one until we have that plan?
Well, why don't we just leave? Like, we can always add the non-overloaded, like the smaller versions later if that plan doesn't.
What you're saying is right now, neither make them optional nor add overloads.
For now.
So now,
all the required parameters.
Start with the longest ones, which are going to be
start
there
with the longest ones. We can always make them optional
Or
in the future or shorter. Yeah. Either way. So just start with these are the bulk of the methods, and then let's have a write up on
the code written, reviewed, right? I mean, we have that already, but like.
And then it's going to be a couple of line changes to do either.
But that still bumps the priority on this because
So we
would tie sort of.
We'll create an FXCC work item to look at it. There are other APIs too, like parse that are async in this method thing too. So
that's could be found.
Just make sure, that it doesn't read like, please do this.
Yes, make it clear.
So, there's still notes coming up for us. Yes, they'll look for us for now.
Just say, don't do this right now. Right?
Versions of these that end of the lifetime construction of the stream. So like you could give it a factory and then create it, set up the continuation and call through and take that, but extension stacks.
Are we happy with that comment?
Well, you could have a load options. You could introduce a load options that says they own the object. I don't know if
to dispose it.
I don't know if load options has.
Yeah, that could be a way to fix that dispose problem.
If you have a look at most of our stream wrappers and things, they all add a bool at the end that says own stream.
If that's a pattern, then.
Well, it's super annoying though because.
It makes sense with constructors, but not with.
So leave open most of the time. A lot of things steal ownership by default, and then you have to say leave. You have to opt
when you
in
get a stream, you never know.
Usually it's on construction. It's very complicated, actually.
Yeah, I wish there was some sort of pattern that we could say hand off this.
I really wish there was like a streamable abstraction. Like you have enumerable, and then you get an enumerator. And you're like, okay, my enumerator, right? And a stream is like this mutable thing you can move around, and you're like passing it around, and it represents two things. It represents the state of the streaming and the resource at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is really kind of like can be problematic for a lot of scenarios where.
Well, Well, wouldn't the way to do that be to just like have an overload that took a factor instead of the stream? So like you pass in a lambda to
Sure,
construct it,
but then that factory is identical to sort of a streamable abstraction. But I think that we would end up, if we did that, we would end up with a lot of places in the framework that should take these factories, and then we should probably name this thing and
name it.
Yeah, and call it, But anyhow, that's another one to table, I guess. But
No, that one is difficult. The previous ones were easy.
yeah.
Another question: in all of Xlink, are these the only I/O-related methods, or are there others?
Pretty sure those are actually it. It's all that. Everything else is just a simple, stupid data type.
Most of these, this is X document and X element. X element's the one, the other load one.
Really? I didn't realize that.
That has this as well. And X document is basically composed of a whole bunch of X elements.
Oh, good.
So we probably had to add these overloads on that internally to implement this.
All right, we should.
We also have parse, but
Right,
parse
can
is
you
compute,
move the
obviously.
mouse?
So
You have to put save async down there too. Then.
yeah, I basically did that.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Scroll down.
Yeah, they gotta.
Oh, what was it? They were text. They were just load from text, right? So yeah. So we don't.
Does the X element have the URIs from?
Oh wait, there is save. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying all the comments on X document they apply here too.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they included to add a corresponding save one, right?
and load eagerly loads the whole thing, right, and puts it into the object model, so there isn't any.
Should parse be async?
No,
We'll just
it's
read
an
from
in
memory,
memory
right?
thing, right? Let the caller decide. Right?
It's the same what you guys did in Rostam, right? The underlying compiler is all compute, so most of the things is in async, and then it works with layer, makes everything async, right? But that's mostly for, it's mostly for composition.
So the one downside, I buy that argument for scalability, but there's another thing that async adds. It's cancellation.
Yeah, that's
So
the thing.
so
I mean, you could add, if you wanted to,
Yeah,
you could
that's a good
add a
point.
cancellation token to synchronous methods, but you wouldn't make it async.
That's the thing is making wrapping parse and a custom parse async method is it will get the caller to unlock, but it won't stop the underlying parse operation.
Right, but again, we shouldn't be making parse async as a result. If we want to do anything, we would add a cancellation token. to the synchronous.
Yes.
Yeah, but we don't have a patent. Do we have a patent for that? I
Add
haven't.
a cancellation token to the
Have an over. I think Tom just like
Have we done that? We have precedents for that. Yeah, we
Do we
certainly
have any
could.
precedents of
We had
that?
a few
I've
APIs
needed
that
to do it a number of times.
We've done that in the editor's done that as well. The WPF editor has done that. They introduced a new interface that has the exact same method, but with a cancellation.
Interesting. So okay, so we should definitely look at that.
So we had other APIs that we wish we would have done it. So think of regex. So we added a timeout.
Yeah.
That passed into cancellation, and then have somebody else cancel it.
Yes.
That would have been better.
Yeah, we should have done that. Yeah.
Rosman has a lot of APIs which have
Yeah.
cancellation tokens, but internally there is no much asynchrony. It's all up to the caller.
All right.
You just confetti the code.
Every once in a
with,
while you
checks
check
and
it.
so
So
on.
often.
Yeah,
pretty much
basically
it is.
on the course level you can cancel binding.
You take over on the cancellation token
User moved on.
So is there a
For parse.
or synchronous APIs for
Synchronous APIs.
This is for FXC backlog.
Yes.
Yeah,
But
FXT.
it's cleaner.
Yes, it's cleaner threadable.
Yes.
What? Redport is like the dirtiest thing possible. Everything's cleaner than it.
Smaller than infinity.
Yes, there we go. Infinite evil and not infinite evil.
All right. Looked at this, looked at this, looked at that. All right, so now let's actually look at the I will just start first and top down and then see how far we get. First one is actually from Jared, so that should make it a little bit easier.
So the basic proposal here is a mutable array is just supposed to be as close to a vanilla array as possible, except you can't change the elements. Like we want to have all of the same behavior, and to a large degree we have that. The one thing that we do not have is a really intuitive and efficient casting API. So basically the ability to move from an array of dogs to an array of animals and back down again. There's basically three ways that the cast can take. One is statically verifiable cast. So I'm moving from basically a dog array to an animal array. That's something that will always succeed. CLR needs no type checks. This is literally just a pointer transfer. Then dynamic cast, where you're basically going the other direction. which is always a dynamic type check and dynamic failure, and the as case, which is just as. So do the type check, return null if fail. Today, the immutable API has two of the three. It has the as case with instance method on immutable array called as, which is very discoverable, pretty easy to do. The static upcast one exists, but it is a static method on the non-generic immutable array called create. Yeah, and it's that one is problematic because it's not discoverable, and if you do and it's part of 9 total overloads, I think, and of the 9, it is the only one that does not allocate any new memory, and so unless you actually find the right one and read through the gory details, you would probably assume that it created a new array, which was of the derived type, instead of doing a non-allocating conversion. And the other one, there's just no dynamic cast one. There is no easy way to do a side cast. Essentially, if I have ifus and I want to have an array of ibars, like, there's just no way to do that. You have to use as, check for null, and then throw your own invalid cast exception, which is generally taboo because the CLR should be throwing those, not us.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that you just briefly skipped over that is the fact that there's no type inference, right? So you basically have to pause in both.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yes, with the immutable create, you have to use both types. So as you can see here in this sample, if you want to go from the immutable array of dogs to animals, you have to specify both animal and dog, because the way the API is designed, it can't leverage type inference at all. So Roslyn, we really depend on the non-type check, non-allocating version of casting, and the type inference is actually such a burden to us that we've written our own wrapper around it. It's called static cast of t cast from, and then we can use type inference to grab the right type out of there. So the proposal was to basically delete the create method, then leave as, because as is, we think, pretty intuitive, does exactly what it says, then add 2 methods, cast from and cast or cast array. And the idea is cast from is the statically verifiable upcast one, and cast array is do the CLR cast of the underlying array and return the immutable array wrapper on top of it.
Why did we eschew the cast up naming for what's now called cast from?
Because we can't, as you pointed out, the type parameters don't work that way.
No. Not change the signature, just change the name. Cast up as the name.
Because it seems kind of, for me at least, it reads odd, because can you scroll down to the use?
Because you're sort of consuming the argument.
Because you have to put the type.
Like here, it would be immutable array dot cast up dog array. Like that kind of works. Like from cast from, that's
The problem with cast from, which I think Christoph mentioned offline, is it doesn't really seem much different than cast. It's
Cast
you're
is
going to run
also
something
from.
to something else. That's always the case.
Yeah. If we wanted to call it cast, so we did bring up that cast for the other method is dicey because of its bad interaction with link, because it would take code. Well, it takes code that compiles today. It would compile to a new method that would have a different failure, different set of results.
It's not that the return type is.
The return type's not the problem. It's the success and fail.
We often have strongly typed implementations.
Right, we can strengthen the return type, but we can't change the semantics.
The semantics
that's
are
the
completely
thing, right?
different.
This is still an immutable array, which is still pre-release.
Yeah, but even if we didn't, it just seems a little dicey in some ways, because in retrospect, I would prefer that the enumeral cast method say cast elements.
Right. But we don't.
Because that's what it's doing. It's not casting enumerable, it's casting the items.
And to be fair, this isn't a breaking change issue. This is an issue of, if I'm reading code and I see cast of t on the collection, I'm thinking, oh, that's enumerable.cast. Now I have to know if something hides it, if a type brings its own cast that is better, more strongly typed, faster, that's all fine. I have the same semantics in my head. But if it comes and it says, yeah, but actually in this case I behave differently than this very well-known thing that works on all collections, then it should have a different name.
But does it really cast just elements, or it changes the type of?
It's casting the array.
When you cast from an array of dogs to an array of animals, And then you can add actually animals to the.
No.
You cannot.
No, that's why you have the covariant write checks.
All it's doing is
Well,
casting
I
the
mean,
underlying
this,
array.
This API.
No, you can call
You preserve the fact that it was an array of.
CLR
The
preserves it.
original array
Yes.
around.
That's all it's doing is casting the underlying job.
This is the case where it's legal. Not
Yeah,
like
this
for-
is the case where it's legal and good. It's when you try to write to that animal array, that's when it comes in.
Interestingly enough, it's like we should never have had covariance probably on arrays, but on mutable arrays it seems like a great thing. Oh, and now we're using the
It's awesome. It's perfectly okay if you're not going to write to it. It's the writing part.
But to add, like your argument that it's readability, it's also the fact when I convert. Right? It's already I use T arrays for perf. Now when I use to switch to immutable array, and somewhere in my code path I use the link cast method. Well, the code continues to compile, so I don't find it, and then later on I just have a very subtle behavior.
No, I think cast is too well known. Like it does what it does. So if we're gonna do something that does something else, it should. I liked that's sorry.
Cast
the
arrays.
other issue is like this is a static method, but in VB it will show up on instances as well. Because it
Well,
allows.
we're talking about two. We're talking about the
And then
dynamic
those,
and
like,
static
what
cast.
are you casting? The left or the right?
So previously we've used
That's a good point.
to when you allocate and as when you don't allocate, but you do this cast, but you're using as sort of like the language feature as to mean it can return null versus it can throw. And so that's the problem is that we have to have, two words, one that means we can throw and one that means that we're just going to return null.
So basically, the bottom one is we don't like both names, right? It's essentially right. So we don't like cast because it's clashing with link, and then cast from we would prefer cast.
I like up or some convention like Steven was saying because from is all casts are from something
As
right?
as or default.
imply a direction.
Up does not bother me at all. Cast up, cast from. I'm fine with both of them.
As much as the language construct, which is
Say safe
I mean,
cast or
that's-
static cast or but
Yeah, but we'll already have a pattern for the methods.
something like that. It doesn't have but like up is something that the from is just ambiguous. Yeah.
Oh, I don't like
That's-
up because I never know whether it's up or down, right?
I always forget.
Or
Like-
static or
What? You don't know what's up or down?
No,
Come on.
it's the same with stack.
from Australia.
So you're one of the guys who comes to the airport and is confused whether you have to go to arrivals or departures because I'm arriving, so I have to go to arrivals. Anyway. So I think that's something we should probably review in the actual Apex review for this one. I mean, go with one name or the other, and then we can just.
Right, well, we said we were just going through the proposals and we were going to unblock sort of going forward.
I think there's no pushback on having these two methods, right?
And getting rid of the create method.
We like the concept.
Yes.
The names, we would like them to communicate what's the difference between these two APIs.
Cast 1, cast 2.
I'll make sure A, cast B.
Can't say.
All right. Sounds good.
I'll just add some dummy APIs we can debate later.
All right. Second one. So I think Steven has some context on that one, right? Oh, was it?
So concurrent dictionary has individual operations that do things atomically. Try add, try update, try get, whatnot, or try get value. It has a couple methods that do common composite operations, get or add or update, where it does the operations atomically. And they're not the kind of things that, does the operations atomically. The overloads that currently exist take delegates. So get or add takes a delegate that gives you the key that you're passing in and allows you to compute something based on the key and compute a value. Add or update does the same for the add, and then there's an update delegate that takes both the key and the existing value, allows you to compute something and store the result back. However, if you need more information in those delegates besides just the key, you have some additional state you want to pass in, you have to take a closure, which results in the closure allocation and the associated delegate allocation. Justin's proposing adding two overloads that basically allow you to pass in additional state through an argument rather than requiring a closure. It's a valid request. For certain cases where you actually want to do this, it can help with performance. It is possible, if you scroll down email, to implement these entirely on top of the public surface area. So these two extension methods here are almost as efficient as we could do internally. I think add or update is as efficient as we could do internally, and get or add, we could do it slightly more efficiently in certain cases, but basically they're the same. And so it's really a question of, it is a valid case, but it's possible to do with what's already there. and is this really so common, and is the performance gain really so valuable that it's worth adding additional overloads?
So the slight inefficiency comes from having to do lookup twice, basically. Is that in the implementation? Allocation-wise, it's equivalent. It's just code execution. There's more code run.
So the primary difference in get or add is if you see, in this implementation, I basically have a loop where I say, try and get the value if I can return. Otherwise, try add. And if try add fails because someone concurrently came in and added at the same time, I have to loop around again. The internal implementation, try add, adding to a concurrent dictionary ends up taking a lock. And while it's holding that lock, the internal implementation can say, if the add fails, then get whatever value was there. And so it avoids the loop.
But isn't there even more? Like, if we added this method to the data structure directly, we could have a single operation that looks up the bucket and then either retrieves the value from the bucket or adds. Right?
Constructs a value outside of the lock.
It's possible. But I guess the other costs here are going to outweigh the bucket hashing, I think.
Yeah, I think it's.
Or we could compute the hash code once, at least.
Well, the most likely case. It seems like the most likely case. It's either it succeeds on the first try, or you have the conflict and you have to come back around. So you end up taking the lock, comparing the values, getting the hash keys 4 times, versus if we did this internally, it all happened once.
It's possible we could add internally a super duper operation that avoided multiple hashes like this. I have to go look at the implementation to see whether that would actually pan out. But I don't think it would save me much. There's already volatile operations in here, a whole bunch of stuff. The fast path where the data is already there is very cheap. You have basically one volatile and a hash bucket lookup, and try to get value. And if that succeeds, you're done.
I think the discussion we had yesterday was more matter around the fact where do we draw the line between having like a million operations that are all more or less the same versus a few ones that are higher level and basically get you 90% of the way and you just have to write a little code on top.
What I was getting at, I think it depends what's the delta between the performance difference. That's why I wanted to understand if the performance difference is the only thing is this while loop, then maybe it's not enough. But it seems to me like it's not only while loop. Every time you go through a while loop, you compute hash codes of the keys separately for first try get, and then for add. But Steven may be right. In a non-concurrent dictionary, you can compute the hash code once and actually do this very efficiently because you don't have the concurrency that you have to also deal with.
But you're right. The hash code, assuming a good comparer, theoretically shouldn't change. And so maybe there are more efficiencies that the existing implementation could be doing in its existing implementation of get or add or update to avoid multiple hash computations.
It really comes down to, where is this, who's running into this and what scenario. The allocation of the closure has to be a problem to begin with for this to even be interesting. So then you're in that path. And then the question is, you can save the allocation with you could write this code. If you're in that group now where you need to save this allocation, you write this code. Now the question is, are you also, now you've saved this allocation, are you now up against this other last bit of efficiency? And that doesn't seem clear because it's like a bunch of ands that you have to be in for it to actually, be a problem. So it doesn't seem like we have like a clear, case where it matters.
Go and measure.
I think it's if you're at a place where the allocation, that closure matters, I would say the replacing that allocation with taking a lock potentially 4 times, that seems like that would matter. I can't imagine that.
But those are very different cases. The only time you end up taking that lock 4 times is if you have serious contention, which is a different case from I'm calling this API and therefore I need to allocate.
So best case scenario, you double the amount of time you take the lock, though.
I understand that. Try get value doesn't take the lock.
Oh, try get value does not take the lock.
But I think you would compute hashes twice.
Well, you would, yeah.
Last time I checked, it first checks if element is there, then it computes the value if it's not there, not under the log, because computing the value may try to use the same collection, you'd get deadlock. So
Sorry, I didn't quite follow. Try get value does not take the lock.
yeah,
Try add does. It does compute the hash code multiple times.
So you're
Try
assuming
add
like
does.
if you assume that get or add is in the scenario where it's usually there, and like one time it faults it in or something, then it's usually there. It just goes return value, no lock, and it's done.
So I mean,
Right.
so I think there's a couple of things we're discussing here. One question is, are there opportunities to improve the existing efficiency of our existing implementation? That's certainly something we can go investigate. There is the current performance of getter add and adder update, and how does that compare to someone writing them on their own with these loops? And then, and there's that delta. And there's the delta between, well, if we could make our implementation more efficient, what's the delta between these two? If that delta is small, if that delta is large, then that means that you really can't do this well on your own. Yeah. And so that just, leads us towards, okay, maybe we should add these overloads. If the delta is small, then it's really a question of, well, how painful is it if you want to avoid those allocations to copy and paste something like this into your project? Right. And I don't know that we have enough usage data to argue whether this is important or not. Roslyn makes fair use of concurrent dictionary, right? Does it use these composite operations?
I don't. I'd have to look it up, but I'm sure we do in a couple places.
It'd be interesting to see whether. I mean, it's one example, but
Look it up.
Well, we have data. We could look up data on other usages elsewhere on this.
Well, you can't look update on that particular usage. Or what
Well, you could have a look at it.
The question is whether the uses that that currently exist are allocating a closure and delegate, and whether those allocations are problematic, or whether cleaning them up would result in significant improvements.
It does seem
There's
quite
no
likely that
allocation
you would
around
want to close over something that had some information about what you needed to, it does
Yeah, I
seem
think
like
it's probably an 80-20 case. I think a lot of times it is based on the key.
Sure.
And that's already being passed in.
True.
And things like add or update, one of the most common use cases is you're maintaining a count of how often you see something, and all you need is the key to look it up and the existing value. But there are certainly, you can absolutely come up with cases where you want some additional state. I think Justin had a couple examples.
Gotcha.
And there's no guarantee the value factor is called multiple times, right? It's not atomic, right?
It may be called multiple times. The atomicity is in the providing of the key and a guarantee that the value that you eventually store back in will be based on the key that was provided or that was there.
I see.
And if that compare exchange fails, it'll try again. The whole thing.
Yeah, I think my general argument still holds is that it basically is the question of like what, as you said, like what's the delta between us providing it versus somebody else providing it, and then the question is this a very common API in general? Because if the delta is small, but it's a super common API, it may still be worth to add just because of that, right? So it's a combination of these two factors. I mean, I don't know, to me they don't look like super remote either, right? I mean, they're
not remote, but the question is, will people actually use them? Like underneath, you don't really think that. Oh, I'm allocating a closure here. It's just a nice syntax for capturing.
I would probably, unless I ran into an actual perf bug, just from the readability factor, end up closing over the data rather than looking for a TR. So you really have to be like, it's not, you won't happen upon this. You have to be really zoned into it to like even think of looking for this.
Yes, no. Those are just new overloads. We already have these methods.
Right.
This PR just adds overloads.
But if I have this scenario where I need to use some extra thing plus the key to produce something, I'm going to naturally just close over that and write the code as I would now.
And in most cases, if you don't care, it's going to be fine. But then you notice that you have a problem.
And then you say,
then you email us and you say, guys, your APIs are slow. And then we tell you, by the way, there is this workaround, correct?
So,
and if we don't have a workaround because we didn't either add this API or this open-coded solution is too slow, then...
Understood.
So I should mention that I have no concerns about adding these. However, this is only one example of a much, much, much larger pervasive set. Every method in the .NET framework that takes a delegate could have an overload that did this.
Yes.
Every method on link,
every
method
scary.
on list of T that takes a predicate of T, like they all follow this pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And closures are like wonderful things, like for the most part. Like I understand that, they allocate, but like,
Well, the question boils down to like, I mean, like, is the API likely being perf sensitive or called in tight loops, right? And I mean, once you use concurrent dictionary, I think it's fair to say, well, you're using it concurrently, so go figure, right? I mean, if you use link in your tight loops, you probably have other perf problems than the fact that you can instantiate a closer somewhere, right?
Sure,
I
but
mean,
things like list of t.remove, that takes a predicate of t.
Sure.
I can certainly see that being used on a hot path.
Yes. Well, but expanding that to manually written code is also easy because there's no other things involved. This one here, because there's concurrency involved, like writing it yourself is something that is not super trivial, right? It's not obvious how you would fix it by hand.
Sure, at the same time, it's very easy to screw up a remove on a list.
Sure, totally.
Yeah. But it's also easy to diagnose, right, once you hit it. Like, concurrency is a lot harder to debug once you hit it, right? I mean...
On list of T, there is a workaround. We send you the right code sample. Correct? For this one, it may not be as easy. Right?
So are we settling on basically not adding these unless we can prove that there's actually a benefit of either heavily used common pattern or that you can't get the perf you want out of it from implementing yourself?
I was actually leaning towards maybe we should just add them. They don't seem too bad, and they're overloads. But the last point is what convinced me is that
are we saying that we're going to do this? I don't want to do this in everywhere. This is not a pattern I want to add a whole bunch of overloads to the framework for.
Well, it's not. I know we don't want to do it everywhere, but as we've pointed out, like the solution for list of T, like you can do it yourself. Concurrent dictionary.
Yeah, so if we can prove that we can do this the performant way with these helper code, that you can do it yourself, right?
So let me take an action item. I will go investigate whether we can improve the existing methods by minimizing the hashing further, and take a look at basically comparing this against that, and see what the difference is.
That seems reasonable.
And if it's sizable, I think we should go ahead and add these. If it's not sizable,
perfect. What are the overloads? Including you doing it.
All right. So then that's the feedback for this one. This one is blocked basically until we hear back from you, right? I think that's the idea.
We're going in the order of opposite.
What do you mean?
How recent the request was.
Yeah, I just walk in one order, right? And this was the easiest one we had.
We'll reverse it
next time. Next time, that's a good point.
Architect, you have a preference for.
Well, it's only it's a fairness.
Well, yeah, fairness. We should have started bottom up, but
it's also that little badge on Sure. Of course, yes. Of course.
All right, so this one. I think the idea here is we have hash set that doesn't take a capacity, and we would just add the capacity, and so you don't have to reallocate, right?
Yeah.
Seems like a no-brainer to me.
It's a no-brainer. Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. All right, let me go to the bottom then.
Are you sure?
It makes it easier, right?
We already did that one.
Oh, so the order reversed at some point, I think.
Yep.
No, we
we did the
this one.
Oh.
All right, so this is the validation one, which is interesting one. So I can take this one unless someone else wants to. So basically the idea is if you look at regex, you basically have a method that takes in the regex as a string. And now imagine you want to do something with that up front. So imagine you would do the Rosling quick fix where you actually pass in the string as a literal and want to provide better diagnostics why your regex is malformed, right? In today's world, what happens is the implementation of the analyzer would basically just try to instantiate the regex with this thing, would catch the corresponding exception, take the message and output it. That message itself does not have a lot of detail. It's basically saying, invalid character at offset 15 or something, right? And then you can construct this with the position in the source code and maybe able to add a squiggle or something, but it's not super awesome if you really want to provide a great quick fix experience. And so the idea is basically how would we expand that? And so there's basically two somewhat interrelated things. So you could just say maybe the exceptions would expose widget objects to actually have that, or maybe you just have a general method that basically does the parsing and gives you back a parse result. And then it's essentially something that is similar to try parse, where you can just look at this thing and say, is it actually correct or not? And then if not, then you just do something with the result.
Regex parser should be a struct.
What are the existing? We don't.
Before we even say this be a struct, we should decide whether or not we think that result object is useful enough.
Well, so
why would we really? I guess I don't understand. Like when I'm getting stuck on here is the collection of errors part.
Yeah.
Like I would just go, it failed here. I'm done. Like once we have having recoverable errors in a parser, it's like I'm going to hit one error, correct for it, and keep giving you more errors. Like no, just give them the first error. You're done. Like I don't.
Which is what we do with the regex exception, basically, right?
Right, which is otherwise you don't it doesn't look like it, but you're asking for a bunch of work to be done in the regex. To
That's
actually do the error recovery, right? Which it doesn't do today.
And I don't want. I'm trading the performance of exception for the performance of error recovery. I just want to know if this did or didn't work.
The other place where we do something like this, where we provide a collection of errors, is in cryptography, but it's different because we're not parsing anything. We're just actually like getting from the underlying API what are all the errors in the certificate chain.
So what if we were to just what does the exception look like out here? Do we throw a custom exception here? What?
I believe we do.
Return the exception.
No, we're kind of conflating two things here, which is one is how do I parse this thing without throwing an exception?
Yes.
And two, how do I provide more information about the issue that I ran into?
Overload with an out parameter?
No, but so like, does the exception path in the regex case, like you're writing in Roslyn?
Yeah. Does it actually give you any character information? Right.
I would first check that. Are we worried about the perf sensitive case in like one exception for an invalid?
So I always say this: it's not just perf for exceptions; it's also the debugging sucks. Right now, this thing that's totally expected to happen is now causing you to break, and it's really annoying. Like I
already have parse. It already throws.
But
we went and fixed that like for
exceptional circumstances. A malformed regex happens all the time. Like it's a very predictable operation, and paying the exception penalty in terms of UI overhead, like it's.
If you write a definition what exceptional means without being circular, I'm not buying that.
Exceptional. I'll give you a clear exception. Exceptions should be used in cases where the outcome can't be predicted. Like, you can't predict whether or not a file reads.
Here you cannot predict. You're getting the string from the user. You cannot predict what's going on.
But I can ask you, try. And
it's fair. It's fair.
You try. It's like it.
Like we went, but like so. Why did we add all the other parsers to have tries now?
We added try. It's this is the reality versus how we added it as a performance optimization.
Okay.
So that's the reason try was added.
But you're saying, okay.
We can change the guidance when we use try. I'm just saying today the guidance is we use try when performance is a problem.
I think it depends on your definition what you're after. I think if you parse text somewhere in some representation, you always have this case that it didn't parse, right? Like it's part of the contractual idea of parsing, right? Now for ints, like most of the time you get them from config files, so most of the time they probably are correct, right? Versus a programming language. Most often, as I type, it's not a well-formed document, right? Like, XML configuration files on disk, most likely they are well-formed because they happen to be generated or whatever, right? But I can think in this case, the regex, if you really want to use it in a Roslyn-based scenario where you basically analyze the code as it's being typed, the same argument holds true. Most of the time, it's probably not a correct, well-formed regex, right? And so at that point, the question is an API that basically gives you the result in some object model representation better or worse, right? It's like perf, I think, is one aspect to it, but really do I even get enough information out of the exception to give an actionable error message back? Or basically saying,
but it's probably not enough, right? It's probably not enough.
We all, I think, agree that we want to add more information.
Yes,
it's a good suggestion, good request.
Question is, can we just add it to the exception?
I have two requests here.
Yes.
One is,
agreed.
Can we add more information? Yes, we could just add properties to the exception.
Yes.
Okay. The second part of the suggestion, which is, do we add a try API that kind of does.
So for any of the other places where we have try, do we have the case where we want to provide a whole bunch of information? Like, because try parse is just going to give you a bool, and exists, which goes back to your file thing.
Let's think about the Roslyn case, right? Guess what the next thing you're going to do after you want to
try parse? It's like, okay, give me the error.
No, you want to give the error, right? But then you want to take this a step further. You want to add IntelliSense inside their thing.
Yes.
Now, these APIs aren't good enough, right? You have to go and write your own regex parser.
I would also assert that, parsing a regex is probably already expensive, so the perf benefit of the try, I don't quite buy.
But like, if you could get something as simple as it's not valid, and the first character that was encountered that caused the position where the parser was when it decided it was invalid, and you put your squiggly there or something, and
Is that going to be
is
contractual?
that?
So like it's going to be strongly tied.
Well,
to
you could do something with that. If that's all you got, you could do some
So
experience.
I was
Can we look at the
I was getting ready to say that there's actually not a customer object expression.
What
It's actually
argument
worse. It actually just throws argument exception, which is
Okay, well that's fine. So we've had other patterns where we just derive from argument exception.
Yep.
We
Add some
we
properties.
add some properties and
I like that.
It's sad, but
Because
So why don't we separate the proposal? Because I think there's two proposals here. One is, can we add additional information about start and end of where the problem, or I don't even know whether we have end, whether we can calculate end, but at least start position that we encountered the problem. The second one is, can we have a try parse version, and does that also return similar information? I think really there's two proposals here, I don't think we should bucket them because
Agreed.
I could see us not fixing the try parse one, but the exception one I think is.
Well, I think
I
we
could
should.
see us going the other way. So
Really?
So the thing that worries me about the exception, and further on in the PR, there's a bunch of debate about, or issue, I guess, a bunch of debate about like how rich the error information we get ends up being. Like some people were advocating exposing like a mini AST that you could then like walk. Some people are saying like, oh, there's a enum of all the different failure states because they may not be happy with the string that we present to them. And then I get worried like, well, what if we ever want to like add to that enum? Then like now there's this like weird hand-holding method with like anyone who's consumed this. Like, are they going to be safe there? To me, the try thing is much more straightforward. Like I can see in the Roslyn scenario, not wanting to like have exceptions going all the time, especially like first chance exceptions that get caught and breaking into the debugger on that. But being able to see, oh, it just failed. Like at least I could put red squigglies there.
Well, you just squiggle the whole regex.
That to me is very easy. Something we can very easily add as opposed to this like much bigger design.
Okay, so you're saying just a try parse that doesn't just returns a full.
Yeah, I think that's a good, like, I could see doing that as, like, opposed to saying, well, we don't really know how to tackle this, like, exposing the information at the right level and
It
how
won't
that
be a lot of work, by the way, because there are this throw exception all over the parsing code right now.
Sure,
In
but
random places, the whole code will have to be refactored in order to do that.
but so that's one thing. But then figuring out how you have a contract of like errors that this thing can report and how that versions, if it versions at all, that's like a much scarier thing.
On the other hand, I think just because somebody suggested very complicated information that we could expose, I don't think we should throw away the simpler proposal, which is this was the first character.
Yeah, so it may be that as well, right? But
we could just add it to the exception. It doesn't result in any additional APIs except for the exception that we should add anyway, because.
But there could still be a combination, right? You could still have the try parse for the Roslyn case, so that most of the time the regex is probably at some point it will be correct, right? You still don't want to like have that exception pattern.
Guys, the Roslyn case is probably the least likely case.
No, I agree with that, but the thing is, like, if you like to your point about the complexity.
Why do I say that? Because only one person writes a Roslyn parser.
And like to David's point, I think what they end up doing, and I mean, Sharper basically did that. They basically parse the entire thing by hand because then they can provide IntelliSense, custom highlighting, and then once you go on that path, that API gets you.
This API gets you 5%, and then you have to throw it away.
Yeah. In fact, what part of the Roslyn aspect do you think it should be?
I think the fact that it's an editor, that lots of editors could
because
be.
we have there are other editors out there.
I'm not saying that the regex editor. I'm saying the regex editor case is probably the least common usage of regex.
Okay.
Parsing, right? The most common is that you're using regex for what it's entailed, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm saying we shouldn't optimize. We don't optimize the framework around particular cases.
So the goal is that it should be possible, right?
No, but it seems reasonable to just say, okay, well, we have this regex library. So one scenario is you're writing an editor that takes regexes as input, and you want to be able to implement it efficiently. Like we don't write the framework, but it certainly doesn't seem like it's not there's nothing. We have this whole subsystem of the framework which is all about regexes, so it may as well sort of consider sort of these scenarios like as being within its I don't know.
It's like anytime you're taking dynamic data, it makes sense to have the try pattern.
Right.
And I can totally imagine scenarios where people take dynamic regular expression data.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, I think we're all in agreement that try parse is not something that makes sense just for consistency reasons with other APIs. And exposing at least the character offset in the exception seems very targeted, assuming we have the data somewhere, right?
I don't know enough about a regular expression language, but does a character actually, like, is it linear enough that if you can get to a certain point and say, okay, this is the problem, or with all backtracking and all that kind of stuff, could you get a character offset be like,
No, this is not about validating an actual string given the regex, this is validating the regex itself.
I know.
I think
There's no backtracking within that regex.
Steven's asking. I think Steven's asking.
Is it possible?
Is there a way to even give good error, better error information? And I'd say that in general, I'm sure that there are cases there's not, but I'm sure a subset of the errors you could. Like we shouldn't.
I'm saying, is the character offset always actionable? I don't know.
Well, I would say it's probably generally speaking a span, right? I mean, and you may not have the best span, but you have a span. It's better than just somewhere in the string you have scope.
It's about parsing the
No, I understand.
regex, not the.
I understand.
Not
But
the.
with groups, which are start and end contracts,
Yeah.
and with
Look backs and
polls,
stuff. Yep.
all that kind of stuff. Like if I get an offset somewhere, is that really going to tell me where the problem
Like if you have like an
is?
unbalanced parenthesis, is it which one's the problem? Right? Where's the problem? Is it all the way at the end of the regex because it's missing?
Well, yes, well it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, but
But it can
Because that's
always-
where
is that helpful? I would probably like my squiggle to be.
Well, that's where you get the squiggle in C#, right? You always get it at the end if you have an unbalanced thing. Because it doesn't know where it starts.
As a language guy, I'm getting a real kick out of you guys out of this part.
So it's really hard to follow what's going on.
It's possible what I heard.
Guys, we've got like 20 people talking.
The other one is actually parsing.
So in our case, as a like C# language spec, the spec mentions only correct programs. It's absolutely not spec what happens if you are not matching the grammar. It's not a contract what is squiggled. It's like best effort. It's implementation detail. It will change, but this is an API.
But now that
so
you're
it
also
will be a
have,
problem.
but you guys also have APIs now, so you don't just have the language spec. So how do you?
We don't promise you'll get same squigglies.
Not the same squigglies, but you promise there's an API from which I could get some information about where I might want to put a squiggly, and surely that is now contractual because it's an
It's
API.
actually not, because the beauty of it is it's extendable. So someone else could be putting a squiggly in the middle of all squigglies. So
But like you must like well, I actually don't know the Rosin API, so I'm asking. We'll talk off.
definitely don't
Yeah,
guarantee.
but
We definitely don't
generally-
guarantee the positions of our error messages.
Generally, you don't
That'd
depend
be crazy.
on how you fail.
I see.
You depend on whether you fail or not.
But so the point is that like. Yeah, so error messages, we could say that, just because you give additional error info, certainly adding it to an exception, I wouldn't worry about it. If the return value, if the property on the exception got better over time, I would be like, whatever, it's an exception. Is making the result,
Yeah, I am worried about having a full, object model here that represents the parse state, because that completely ties us
I don't
into
think we're-
ever changing the implementation of regex.
Well, it does a lot of work to begin with, right? It's not cheap to do that.
So I think we agree we want better error messages, and it would be nice to have a try version so that we didn't throw all the time in these cases.
Yes.
But not having a whole bunch of object models.
But I would separate
I don't think we can give another way to say it. We can't give you the error message fidelity enough to write like a custom regex validator. Like if you want a custom regex validator, you got to write it. Like our parser is not meant for that kind of. Our parser is take this string, make it regex as fast as possible, and not an editor. Recoverable editor experience is a very different type of parser usually. So.
By the way, you kind of asserted that we are all fine with the try. I don't mind it. It's such a small thing that I'm looking at the definition when people should be throwing exceptions or not in the framework.
I think
because basically by being so inconsistent, I feel like we basically Matt's basically what you said is. Exceptions are bad because they break the debug in the debugger. Therefore, all APIs that throw exceptions, we should have a try versions.
It's not in the debugger. It breaks the user flow. Like using exception semantics for something which is a B problem.
Whatever the reason is, I'm by saying many people bring up reasons why exceptions are bad. So do we want the guidance? Don't use exceptions.
No, I would say here.
Use basically try. From now on, we are designing try APIs.
I think that what I would say the guidance is simple. If you have a synchronous parsing API which takes a string and returns type data, you should have a parse one which throws and a try one which does not.
So it's specific to parsing, you're saying?
I think if you
specific guidance that
I think
in parsing APIs we don't use exceptions. Next question.
No. I'm saying that
Special case.
Well, first of all, the pattern is called the try-parse pattern for a reason, right? Because
Yeah,
it's so
'cause parsing.
pervasive in parsing, right? I mean, I think it's a part being
performance.
well, yeah, but I mean, like, I think it's a reasonable pattern, right?
Like, no, it's not just. It's just the APIs are so much easier to use as well. If you're parsing multiple data in a row, right, an int, a string, an int, a double, so forth, wrapping those things in a catch is painful.
Yeah. So what I'm asking is,
Regardless
where
of the
does it
performance.
stop? Like, do we now keep basically we're saying catching exceptions is hard. The language syntax is inconvenient, and this and that.
I added a note for FXTC follow up on how the exception conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
He doesn't want you to add hard ones to the backlog. So.
Yes. All right. So then it seems the feedback here is like we need to think a bit more about it. But I mean, generally speaking, we certainly don't want to expose an AST. I think we all can argue with that.
Yep.
We could entertain the idea of making the exception a bit richer depending on what information we already have. That if we don't have character information in the regex engine, I don't think we would actually add it probably because it's a lot of plumbing to get it through. And then the question is, how does it regress perf, right? If we already have the data, we should probably expose it. So at least you can do some basic stuff. But then I think we would end there, right?
How about this? Opportunistically better messages.
Yes.
In the discussion, another idea, as opposed to the full AST, was just like a enum for all the error messages.
Yes.
People, like, we give them the key if they don't want to use our localized error messages. That scares me a little. I don't know how everyone else feels about it. Like, we should just give back a string and
String.
Yeah.
Because giving them like an enum is basically saying, hey, can you switch on the text of this error message? It's saying that we're not a recoverable parser. We're going to give you opportunistic data. If you the type of code which needs those error messages, they need a different API. They don't need this API.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring up other things that I remember. From
Okay,
the discussion.
but I really think we need to split this into two proposals. One is the try-parse pattern, and then one is opportunity. More data in the message in the exception, like the start position.
Yes.
I think these are two different issues.
Yeah, we could.
And whether try-parse itself returns that same data is also.
Yes. That seems reasonable.
Like an example of something here from a different perspective is datetime offset, which takes in strings, and so it has try-parse, right? But you could also imagine that, I think of the try-parse as I'm getting data from the user, and I want to go ahead and validate that it's correct before I go ahead and do my thing. And if I get an exception, it's because I programmed something wrong. If I get a false, it's because the user gave me something wrong. But you could also imagine that you have fields, right, for the minutes and hours, right? And we don't offer something to validate that those individual fields are correct before you send them through to the constructor, right? So it does seem like it's what you said earlier. It's if you get a string and you want to parse a string, that's where we only have the pattern today.
Yeah. All right. So if 15 minutes, let's go over the remaining ones because I think there's some ones that we probably can agree faster than others. So one of them is bring back console cancel key press. I don't think there's any major pushback that I've seen so far. Everybody seems to say let's just
don't
add it.
designer implement, make it match.
Yeah, we would just bring the desktop implementation.
Okay, so I mean, this is just a proposal for the API, not the implementation, right? I think implementation-wise, we agree we take the existing one as much as possible, but
We already
we
reviewed
would
that.
expose this API in the first place.
We don't have any cross-block concerns. That was the only thing that we don't. So then it's fine.
All right, so then that's one is done. This one I don't even know what that is, so let's.
I can say what that is.
Okay, let me open the remaining ones. All right.
Okay. So in Win32, when you create a new process with create process, you can choose whether you pass handles that your open inheritable handles to the child process or not.
Yep.
Today we always say yes, pass all open inheritable handles to the child process.
Yep.
The request here is to have an option that says whether we do that or not. One of the reason that we probably do it is in certain cases we need to pass inheritable handles because when you're redirecting standard in and standard out, we need to get the handles into the child process so that it can use them as standard in or standard out.
We also have other API that enables people to file stream enables people to create the file with inheritable handles. I think Christoph, you were looking at pipes did the same. So
What do you
without
do? They have a bool that basically says inherit handles.
it's a value in the enum for the access. I think. Yeah, I think for the access.
So you can opt out on certain. I'm guessing you can opt out.
You can opt in for file stream. For pipes, you have to opt out. And then for networking, for sockets right now. For sockets right now, it's opt-in by default. We don't even expose an API to opt out, and that's because down at WinSock level it was opt out, and they didn't see either the API was added after they initially did it, or they never saw it. So right now, I think this particular one, they said it was creating problems because of the sockets case, because they started up a listener when they started the child process that kept the handle. So when they closed the handle from the first listener, they've still got that child process is bound to that port, and so they can't actually rebind to the port because Notepad is holding the socket handle.
I get it. So it's pretty bad.
It's awful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've seen this request before. I mean, it's come up a bit. Yeah. It looks good. What would we do in the shell execute case? Like, I'm assuming shell execute.
We already have a pattern for this that says if you specify some arguments that disagree with use shell execute, we'll throw. Yes. And we say you need to, in order to use that value, you need to set use shell execute to false. I think we do that.
But so how would inherit handles work? Because it defaults to true.
There are two handle inheritance. One is per handle, so you can specify that this handle can be inheritable. And then when you create a process, you say, hey, all inheritable handles will be inherited or not.
Yeah, but
you could ignore it. Because shell execute doesn't actually cause handle inheritance.
Yeah. My question is that we can't
throw if you have used shell execute to true and inherit handles to false.
That would be breaking, right?
Yeah.
Why would that be breaking? It's going to
default
to
true. The default
is going to be true. It wouldn't break. It would just be like, oh, you set this explicitly to false. We aren't going to pay attention.
Okay, but that's weird. Because you're setting it to false, but that's actually how use shell execute works.
Sure. I'm just saying, right? Like,
so the behavior. So we would probably just ignore the value regardless.
Yeah, we should be careful with this because I'm not sure whether you still can use this component with the visual designers, but it used to be that you could actually drag and drop it onto a form, and then you don't want the forms designer to be throwing exception depending which, you don't want.
We've had to add surface area to process start info. We're aware of those considerations.
Yeah. There's attributes applied to exclude them.
But there's also
we could also consider. I mean, this API has plagued us, so we could also consider just having new API for shell execute and for creating processes, and kind of maybe leaving this one potentially. I want to think about it. Just every increment to process is like pulling teeth.
Yes.
And because of these issues.
To that, there's also the cross-platform concern with this. Yes. So there are already going to be a fair amount of surface area, I think, on the system diagnostics process that will not be supported on Linux because it's Windows systems that surface through. To my knowledge, there's no good way to implement this particular feature on Linux.
But handles? Or inheriting handling or disabling?
No, disabling inheritance and handles.
Handles
you can disable on a per handle basis. For some handles, you can basically say close on execute, which means when you exec fork, that handle won't be. But you can't. I don't know a way to say for all handles that are or file descriptors that are okay with inheritance. Don't inherit.
Okay, so that.
Well, another option we could make it a bool instead, an enum instead of a bool. Right? But the default option could be used.
That's for forking, though, not
apply
exactly.
default, which basically means depending.
In fact, we do have an enum already.
Fork ignores close on exec.
Handle inheritability.
Right, but this is for process start, not fork.
No, I understand. But I'm saying
how many minutes is it?
I don't know. There's no. You can say. Sorry. When you create file descriptors with close on exec. They will be closed when you exec.
Right.
I don't know of any way to say exec close ones that
weren't marked closed as exec.
Yeah, you start saying fork. That's where I was. Sorry. I was like, wait a minute. No, we're process start now.
So you have to fork
the way
exec.
process creation.
Yeah.
You have to do both. Otherwise, yeah.
That's what the exec call was the important one. Yeah. That's what I was trying to understand. But yeah, I get it.
Okay, so there is a cross-plat.
But it won't be the only thing in diagnostics process. So
But the question is, are we better off with an enum that basically has a state that says it depends. It could be true or false depending on how you use me, and that would be the default. And then the other option is
True, false. I don't know.
True, false, default.
Maybe, but it's like do this, do that, or do something.
So those
are the options.
Well, the nice thing is like if you have a 3 state that basically says I don't care, essentially, which is whatever the default is, I use it, I'm happy with that, which is the default for this particular type. The other one is no, I really want to inherit the handles, which would throw on Linux and would not work when you use shell
It
execute.
would probably throw on shell execute.
And then the other one is no, I really don't want to inherit my things, and then it works in the cases that you do.
Option seems scary, like not caring about these kind of things.
Well, but that is the
Well, that's how we've designed
That's
the
how
API.
it is right now.
It's the current state, right?
But the current API, just the very idea that we
design process.
the fact that it is both a wrapper around shell execute and create process is a huge problem.
Yeah.
In
I agree.
every
I
single time we add anything to process start info, we run into all kinds of problems because we have to talk about the semantics of this option to two very different things.
But how would you rationalize that with cross-plat as well?
Well, it's even worse. Cross-plat. What does shell execute even mean?
No,
Cross-plat.
but throw shell execute away. Cross-plat still comes into play here, right? So it doesn't solve the cross-plat issue.
Well, so maybe we should have 3 levels of API. Like one is like very, very like POSIX level, kind of like very simple. Like there are, it doesn't have all kinds of knobs. It's whatever the defaults are. There's a process,
kind of like
generic process. Then you have a Win32 process, and you could have a shell execute thing. You could have three different APIs, and
So that's similar to what Imo suggested.
Yeah.
But I would say the default option should be it does something very simple that works for all platforms, not we don't know what it does.
But I'm suggesting
No, it's not.
I'm
We
suggesting
don't know what it does. We know what it does.
Well, okay, it does different things depending
But
on.
But that's already the situation we're in. We don't inherit handles in the shell execute case. We do in the
Take the shell execute.
create process case.
I was actually
shell execute up.
But like, I don't think you can have something that works cross-plat if the semantics are mutually exclusive, right? So that basically means the behavior must be for the simple case.
Exclusive here.
Well, I mean, if you're basically saying that you cannot actually do certain things on Windows, then of course you have mutually exclusive semantics, right? Because in some cases when you should execute, you literally have a detached scenario where you don't inherit your handles. And the other one, right now, we do inherit the handles. But I think what you're saying is you can't do that on the other side, right?
But it feels like
So that means the default case will not inherit handles, versus on Windows it will inherit the handles. That's mutually exclusive behavior.
No, it's on Windows on Unix handles. So in Windows, there's 2 options, right? For a handle, you can say it's inheritable or not, and then you can say inherit the handles or not. Right?
Okay.
So in Unix for file descriptors, you can say close when execute the
Basically, close when create process.
Yeah, close when create process happens or don't, and the create process call has no way to override that or interpret that in any way. So it's just up to the created handles. So there's no thing that we can do that says, you said don't close this, but you told us not to inherit the handles.
That goes along with what he was saying, right? He was suggesting that by having the enum, the enum would throw another.
So just because Christoph said like what we were saying was similar. So what you were saying was let's make, instead of having bools, let's have these tri-states. And what I was saying is, if I could go back, I would say we're running into problems because we're trying to, like, what should be a Win32 specific, like, actually, instead of having tri-states, have specific, like, classes or options, like Win32 process, like, has more knobs, and they're totally Win32isms, and shell execute is its own thing. And then, ideally, if we want to have something that you can do cross-platform with process, then that would be not like individual tri-states on one big option, but literally a separate API.
I agree, but the problem here is we could throw the baby out with the bathwater here, right? We could say, okay, we need to come up with this new design that says we need to change the way process works, come up with a new process API, just to solve this one little issue.
No, but I think I think the other. I mean, to be fair though, like, is this the only thing that we have, or is this long trail? Like, once you make a cross-plat, it's not just this one thing, but there is 50 more things. Because at that point, it may be actually worthwhile to go down your path.
I'm just saying there
are other things coming up in process start.
Every time this meeting talks about anything on process start info, it takes a long time. And
Yeah,
so
it's
I'm
like a
putting
dentist
into question whether the right way is to sort of diverge from that and have new API that maybe prevent us from.
I would propose that we do something simple, like just add this, and then separately file, like, if we were designing process APIs from scratch to be portable across OS.
I think we all agree with that the current behavior is a problem because of that particular code sample here. The question is whether a bool will actually work, or whether you now have this problem if you call shell execute, it will now suddenly throw, right? That would not be good.
We already have an enum.
This
We already have an enum, so we can actually expose it. If we do expose this, we should use the enum. Right now it has two values, none and inherit, but we can add others.
But that's passed to the file stream and so forth. How do you rationalize that third one? We don't care what you do.
Well, that might not actually get passed. It might get treated as a higher level when we basically decide not to do one code path or another. But
wait, are you saying you'd add another to the existing enum?
If we needed to, not right now. If we were going to care about a different situation.
What namespace is the other enums?
It's right here. It's already used in other cases like pipes or handle inheritability.
There's two other enums, I think.
Are there?
Yeah. There's
Publicly?
In desktop, yeah.
The handle inheritability is already exposed in like pipes at least. I know.
Yeah, there's handle inheritability, and then there's a value on. I think it's file access. It's either file access or file share. Maybe file share.
This is the one we added our new to the system runtime handles contract, which is so going forward. This is kind of the one we're using for inheritability. So.
All right. So. I think we agree with that. There's a problem that we need to solve. The question how we solve it is something we need to figure out. Ideally, we reconcile it with the existing enum, but we have to figure out what that would mean. And for sure, for us, we need to make sure that whether you shall execute or not, you need a sane behavior, right? Either we never throw independent of the value, and it just means if you shall execute, you get a behavior that is essentially ignoring this bool, or we do something other. But I think we need to have.
Do we throw in other cases like does shell inherit environment?
It throws.
It throws.
Wow, sorry.
How can it throw? Because if you read them.
No. It throws with. There's a
bug,
some interesting
right?
code there. There's
the bug is that if you.
It'll throw with redirects. So if you try and set the redirect properties, it'll definitely.
But in other properties, it clearly doesn't.
I don't know if it's comprehensive. I'd have to go back.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
We also, when we go to do this, we need to understand how it interacts with redirects, because like setting this to false and then saying redirects is like
So is someone capturing that?
That's part of it.
The part that we basically have to reconcile there.
The interplay with redirects.
Yep.
The interplay with shell execute and crossplat.
Yeah.
There's a comment in the issue I had added about how this is going to be rationalized on crossplat. So.
All right, remaining two issues.
12 o'clock.
So let's just finish these two. We have only two more, and then we can move on. So basically, we have interlocked applied change. There's already an immutable interlocked API, which essentially has a bunch of methods that make it easy for you to logically mutate, which basically means you're not mutating. You create a new instance, and then you swap out the current field that you have with that. The applied change API just generalizes this and basically says instead of having a specific add API, remove API, you just have a generic one that basically says applied change, and you pass in a lambda that just does it, and then you swap out the result.
Okay.
I think that seems fine.
I didn't like the name personally.
That's fair, but I mean that could be true in the Apex. I think the scenario is.
I think
fine.
it's a good scenario.
Yeah, I think we all agree with that.
But would we remove the more specific versions of these?
So that's something we need to figure out. I'm not sure whether the type has shipped before. The type may have shipped before, and we cannot do this for mutable list, for example.
So yeah, we should add a note that says
we should. Yeah, that's already I think part of the discussion.
Scroll up. What was this? What is this?
What is the deprecation strategy for these things? It's not that they're bad. It's just that this is now the API that allows all of them. Right?
What API is this?
For more specific cases.
You can't see what this is. Like where is this?
No, we shouldn't deprecate things that are.
Where's the mutable interlock?
There's nothing wrong with them.
This is an immutable interlock.
Yeah.
Created a more.
It's a static class.
So we're missing the context of what's already on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't tend to do that.
It's hard to review.
Yeah. But are you fine with the standard? Do you have a question about the API?
I was just questioning because it's I don't know why we have we're basically getting into the exact same discussion that we just had with concurrent dictionary. We're taking something that now has a lambda, which might be a simple A/B exchange.
Yes.
So are we? If we're gonna solve, seems like it's the same problem.
Well, except that this one actually makes it more general, right? We already have the specific ones. This is the general one is missing. Versus
Okay, so we already have one where you can swap A for B.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. As long as we're adding, not removing, then we're good.
Any more? Otherwise, I would just look at the last one.
The tier.
So here the
Alright.
TR I think is
Yeah.
more impactful because this particular API will be used in places where it's basically an assignment.
I see.
So it's much more frequent, and there's no data that's really passed in. Other than the existing value, which
I see.
in the existing list. So if you need any context, it has to be passed in the encoder.
Understood. And then you were just trying to do an assignment.
Well, there is an arc, right? I mean,
No, but
Where? No.
no. I was asking, can we just use closures like because we talked about, but because we had this whole debate on the other, yeah.
I see.
It's always a spectrum, and this one's definitely further down the spectrum of importance.
All right, last one. Bit vector 32. In case you don't know, bit vector 2 is essentially just a wraparound in int32 that exposes it as a bunch of flags. So you have 32 flags at your disposal. This type does not implement I-equatable today.
Yep.
The question should be at that. And the meta discussion that we had yesterday was essentially around the fact that bit vector 32 lives in system collections.specialized, which we consider legacy, which basically means we would like to not touch it at all. We would just say if you have a dependency on any of these types in there, well, then here's the NuGet package for you to just use it. But as far as innovation goes, we would not innovate in them. So same reasoning about why we wouldn't, let's say, implement I enumerable of t on array list, for example.
So
right?
interestingly enough, what's so bad about bit vector 32?
Yeah, that was the other question.
Because,
was
I mean,
bit vector 32
it
in
feels
the
like
wrong
it
place?
got penalized by its namespace.
Yes.
For,
Yeah.
Like it doesn't
Yeah,
feel
no,
like
that was the other thing that you missed discussing, which was the question of whether we should move bit vector
Yes.
to 32.
Well, that was the result of that, but yes.
it doesn't have any of the other problems. It's not like a generic problem, or I can't actually.
Why don't we have an alternative? Why can't you can directly do all these casting directly in just the language?
It has a one big problem. It's limited to 32 bits.
by design. No, it's a question.
Bitwise operations.
I don't really use this.
These are just helpers for bitwise
Well,
operations.
let me see that. Well,
It's not complete, but basically this is
Well,
the things you
it's-
would add.
The bitwise operations, but
Does anyone use
you can say things like, "Oh, it's kind of hard to like. It gets
I'm not
messy."
saying it's hard.
Twiddling like this
I'm
is
saying there is
so
a-
easy to get wrong. Like little helpers that make it helper are useful in the framework.
Except I was only half joking that it's, the flaw is that it's limited to 32 bits.
Right,
It
you
is
could've
a
made
problem, correct?
right,
Because
sure, you could have.
you can, the moment you need more, you're starting to.
And we do have a type for that too, right?
Well, we have bit array, which is
But
It's different. Yeah. Performance.
you allocate. Yeah, you could add bit 30, bit vector long, right? But I mean that at some point you just have to add. All right, but that means basically, so there's three action items that we basically had from the discussion yesterday. The first thing is, do we consider this thing legacy, yes or no? I think that's a decision point we have to make. If we consider it legacy, is it worthwhile adding an interface to it, right? That's, I think, another decision point we can make or not.
it's more than an interface. It's an interface plus the operation.
Actually, the operations is a separable discussion from the interface. We could just add the equals method that doesn't box.
why do we need to add? Why do we need to add the equality operator? It's a struct. It's already just going to go to value comparison.
There wasn't a construct super slow unless you actually do it.
Okay.
I think it does. I think on Project M we don't use reflection anymore for that, but I think on Framework we actually reflect over the
We
structure.
reflect if it contains a value type.
Yeah.
If it doesn't contain a value type, a reference type.
This is just a value type, so this is just bit comparisons.
Yeah, it's a memcat. It's just a.
It's just
Yeah.
following the.
I agree.
You do this, and you'll never go wrong. Kind of pattern.
We should have a follow-up question of what is this compared to bit array, and should we have
Yes.
one or the other should be right?
Yeah, if we don't declare legacy, then we should reconcile it with bit array, I think.
Bit array uses bytes for each flag, correct?
The bit array already has a slow comparison because that's a rough type under it.
And still it uses bytes per flag. Is that?
I can't tell you offhand. Sorry.
It's got a list of bytes because it's growable.
What we really need is bit vector.
I don't know if it's byte or int.
Bytes.
I'm joking.
Well, I was going to say this has parallels with this.
Guys, let's have one person talking at a time because it's
Yeah.
we're recording.
Yeah. All right. So that seems all right. This one needs a bit more baking. All right. Thanks, guys, for the review, and then I will stop recording now and figure out how to do that.
Why should we only have one conversation? Our customers should be. They want the real experience.